Mr. Peterson, does that sound any better?
Ms. Newbill as well, Dr. Newbill.
She's not on yet.
Mr. Peterson is muted.
He's working on it.
Is he?
Yes, much better.
Okay, lucky. We got you loud and clear, sir.
Dr. Newell. Dr. Newell.
She's not on yet.
That was also considered.
She's not on yet.
But hopefully that'll. He's got fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We do have enough of an Austrian. Just got the Austrians.
Yes. Good morning, all. We would like to call to order the Richmond Regional Transportation Plan Organization Policy Board meeting. Today, June the 3rd, to order. We will start by standing for our pledge of allegiance to the flag.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We'd like to take the opportunity to welcome all of you to our in-person in Harvard meeting today. Especially we have a new alternate for a member for our policy board, and that is Ms. Karen Powhatan. So Ms. Carmack, we welcome you today, and we look forward to seeing you in person, ma'am, soon and very soon. What a great opportunity to be able to see so many faces this morning. I thank you all for your support going through our virtual meetings and dealing with my first year chairing this wonderful organization. And what a year it has been. But we are seeing the light. And so we will move on and look forward to a new and exciting new year, which starts July the 1st for us. So,
Well, Madam Chair, may I say a few words?
so you want to say I'm already, we just starting the meeting?
I wanted to thank you for coming to the fore. You know, as you said, this hasn't been an easy year for any of us. And particularly when you're trying to chair virtual meetings in the backdrop of a pandemic. And I'm sure I speak for all of us, we appreciate your leadership.
Thank you, thank you. Absolutely.
Well said.
Thank you. So a statement regarding our virtual meeting was in your packet, so we don't have to deal with that, but we do have to do roll call and certification form.
Yes, Madam Chair. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Here.
Hello, parents.
Hey, Dr. New. Morning. Chester.
Hello.
President Jim Holland.
Mr. Carroll.
Here in person.
Mr. Holland.
Hello. Aye.
Hello.
Jim Holland. Aye.
Phillips.
I'm here.
Hanover County, Mr. Davis.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Here.
Pritchard. Here, Mr. Thornton. Mr. Cannon. New Kent County Chair Page.
Here.
Mr. Tiller.
Mr. Evelyn. Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Here.
Ms. Carmack,
Here.
Addison. And
Hello, I am having some technical difficulty. This is Cynthia Newbell. Just want to let you know I'm here.
Miguel, we can hear you loud and clear.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Jones. Ms. Larson. Ms. Robertson. Capital Region Airport Commission, Mr. Rutledge. GRTC, Ms. Tim.
Present.
Richmond Metropolitan Transportation Authority, Ms. Dean.
Here.
Mr. Mann.
Here.
Mr. Riblet. CTAC, Mr. Basham. Mr. Martin. DRPT, Ms. DeBrule.
Here.
I can see her online with us. Federal Highway Administration, Mr. Nelson.
Richard Duran, representing Mr. Nelson.
Good morning, Mr. Duran. Federal Transit Administration, Mr. Koenig. Ride Finders, Ms. Tisdale. Ms. Ruffin. Ms. Ruffin is with us. She is. Virginia Department of Aviation, Mr. Burnett. Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. Madam Chair, you have a floor.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mueller. Moving along on the agenda, on Administration 1, consideration of amendments to our action meeting agenda. Are there any deletions, revisions to our agenda? Hearing none, we will move on to A2, which is approval of our May 6, 2021 TPO Policy Board action meeting minutes.
Motion to approve, ma'am.
Second, Madam Chair.
Approve our May 6 meeting. All in favor, say aye.
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 All opposed have the same option. All right, it has been moved. Open public comment period. Have we received any
We have
emails?
not received any requests. ma'am.
Absolutely, we will close our open public comment period. Chair's report, item A4. Would like to take this opportunity to, we talked first about virtual meetings and everything that has gone on this year. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank especially these two that are sitting beside me, Mr. Parsons and Ms. Mueller. You don't know what they went through to help me through this year. And so if I had the money, I'd pay you, but I just don't have enough money to pay you for what you put, what I put you through. But Mr. Parsons, for you to come in and then your next year, we're all virtual. And then CBTA, along with your other duties and responsibilities, sir, it is so appreciated, not only by myself, but this entire board. And so we thank you for all that you have done, all that you're doing, and all that you will do for this organization. And then this young lady, Ms. Mueller, I don't know if you all realize how hard this young lady works to get all of our minutes, all of the numerous notices that we receive by text and email, and all of the minutes, and then you don't even know what her daily workload is. But I'm telling you, you do it all with excellence. And so we thank you. I personally, and as a representative for this board, thank you, ma'am, for all that you have been doing. Your patience with me, thank you. And you are a great teacher, so thank you for that. And we want you to know that you are so appreciated. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so we did so good when we were at the train station with keeping on time. I asked today that we all be mindful of the minutes that you're given during each one of these on our agenda. And we try to stay close to that However, we do entertain your discussion, your comments, because this is a meeting. But if we can stay as close as possible, if not today, I have a gavel. And so, I just wanted you, I didn't want you to be shocked when you hear it falling. So we will move on now to our TPO Secretary's report, Mr. Parsons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for the kind words. We are moving into the Secretary's report and 5A. The current work efforts were included in your packets as links. Hopefully everyone has had a chance to review those. We're doing lots of great things at the staff level. You're going to be hearing about many of this today under our new business. But I did want to highlight that we are in the final home stretch for the Long Range Transportation Plan, Connect RVA 2045. And I am looking forward to the next few months in working closely with you all as we shepherd this plan through its final phase. And I'm excited about the opportunity it's going to bring to our region to help identify at one location, one source, what our regional priorities are for transportation. And I can't say enough about the great work that our staff has done over the last year plus, especially during the trying times that we've had to gauge community input, to work closely with all of our technical staff at each of our member jurisdictions, and to make sure that this process moves smoothly into its recommendation phase. So again, look forward to bringing that to you, lots more information to you in the coming months. The financial report was included in your agenda packet as well under 5B, and I don't have any particular highlights to bring to you. We are approaching the end of the fiscal year. This is the last month, and we'll be looking to close out the budget for this fiscal year and start fresh on July 1. We do have expected carryover for a number of our grant programs, just based on the limitations of staffing this past year. And we're excited about bringing on additional staff in the coming year, and to make sure that we are able to expand our capabilities in many areas, including public engagement and technical support. I think one update I'll give you on CVTA, many of you are engaged just as much as I am. But the CVTA, the full authority, met last week, and one of the exciting outcomes of that meeting was the recognition that the fall line is an important regional project, and it's something that the CVTA feels should be a priority, and we will be watching that the prioritization process as the CVTA develops that to make sure that that fall line is considered as a regional priority, along with others that may be identified in that priority list. So stay tuned to that. But that's we're starting to see some of the regional work, the 35% of the CVTA revenues start to come into focus. And then the last item, there were handouts on the table, and for anyone following online, there is in the meeting, on the meeting page, there is a highlighted item 5B for the RRTPO boundary adjustment. Great, Nicole's putting that on the screen now. We have been working closely with VDOT and Federal Highways over the last 9 months to discuss and come up with a plan for expanding the TPO boundary. In December, if you recall, the TPO took action to expand the boundary to match the existing Plan RVA boundary as well as the CVTA boundary, which is essentially Planning District 15. This would, in essence, include the entireties of Powhatan, Goochland, New Kent, and Charles City counties as part of the urban metropolitan planning area. And the request was made in December for VDOT to consider that boundary expansion. We did receive notice on May 17th that VDOT has approved the boundary expansion. with the effective date of May 17th. At that, the receipt of that letter, staff realized that there were many things that needed to be considered that may be impacted in terms of planning work and planning processes that we are undertaking this year, including the long-range transportation plan, our transportation improvement program, our RSTP CMAQ grant funding programs, and others. And in further discussion with VDOT, staff's recommendation, strong recommendation, is that the TPO take action to accept the boundary change approval from VDOT, and then set in motion a plan to implement that change by October 15th of 2021. That will allow staff to develop a full understanding of the impacts to all of our programs and planning processes, and make sure that we have adequately accounted for any data changes or model efforts or other types of impacts that boundary change may have of the TPO. So the action requested is that, again, staff recommends the TPO accept the boundary change approval from VDOT and set in motion a plan to implement that boundary change by October 15th with a full understanding of its impacts on Plan RDA as administering agency for the TPO.
Okay, you have heard the staff recommendation. Do we have any discussions, any comments regarding the NPO boundary adjustments expansion? Not the chair. Yes, ma'am.
I'm so sorry. I didn't think about this earlier. There's still, I believe Chesterfield County has still a piece that's part of Crater District. So does the entire county of Chester, is that the only one? Is that the only? Are
Yes,
all the
that's-
other members here wholly within, other than the ones we're adding?
That is correct. Chesterfield
What
has,
about Chelsea?
the southern portion of Chesterfield is in Tri-Cities, and it would remain in that way.
No.
That would not change. We're
Okay,
just
so we're not
talking
even
about
looking at
the,
that. And so is that portion of the county part of the CBTA?
Yes.
yes,
Okay, so is that not the same problem that we have? They're not matching up?
No.
Okay, all right.
that's not a concern for
Okay,
Chesterfield County.
fair enough. Thank you.
I don't want to speak for Mr. Carroll.
I just said it.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, that's all. Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd like to follow up on what Ms. Lascala brought up in executive session. That chat pertains to the dues. How will this affect, with the later implementation date in October 15th? How will that affect the dues? Because number one, we're going to have all the locality within the NPO boundary. Okay. But that said, you're going to have a lag period now. So the implementation date is going to be October 15th. So how does that play out?
Yes, sir. That's a great question, and it's one of those things that's on our list to
Sort
confirm, to sort out between now and October 15th. And I don't think you can. I don't think we can charge dues for something that isn't in place yet. So my expectation is that Plan RDA would probably be taking the lead on the due structure and the changes. The other impact, which we didn't discuss, was the rural transportation program. We have been awarded our grant for next year, and in discussions with VDOT, the expectation is that it will be prorated now to reflect that October date. So we would have rural transportation planning funds for at least the first few months of fiscal year 22.
Okay, don't let me forget that, because when I was told last time, that's on a call basis, right? The receipt of those dollars for rural localities, or what was with rural localities, we used to rotate it. And what I found out from our executive director, that changed a number of years ago, that it was on a call basis. In other words, you had to ask.
That's correct. That's the model we're working on right now. And it's for next year, the primary focus was technical assistance. So yes, it'll be on a as needed or request basis.
Okay, a little bit later on, we're going to be talking about the prioritization for RSTP and CMAQ funding. During this interim period going into October 15th, Powhatan, Charles City, Goochland, New Kent will still be able to be considered under whatever process, prioritization process that gets implemented. Is that correct?
That's our that's our focus. That's one, again, on that list of things to sort out. To make sure that that's an option. Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to be left out during that interim period from, consideration in that process.
Yes.
Okay, thank you,
Understand.
Madam Chair.
You're welcome, sir. Any other questions or?
I think that's sort of a point of order. We've already gone through the consideration of amendments to the action meeting agenda, and we didn't add this. So how are we going to add this as something to vote on?
We didn't add what, the action item or
We
the
didn't
MPO?
We didn't add this particular resolution, at that time. So do we need like we have to add it to the agenda. It didn't go out with the other material. If we're gonna vote on it. We are gonna vote on it.
We are gonna, it's not a resolution, yeah.
It's resolved, yes.
I'd like a motion to add it.
Well, it has to be unanimous or something. I don't know our bylaws that well. Maybe your attorney knows how we have it. It's usually either by acclamation or by unanimous consent. I can't, I don't, in so many organizations. We didn't add it at the front.
It only requires a vote of 2/3.
So if 2/3 want it to be on the agenda, it'll be on the agenda. And I think we've got that. I was
Is it
thinking.
appropriate to make the motion now?
Good. Madam Chair. Was there a motion on the floor already? Because if so, then we need to withdraw that motion and make a new one to amend it.
It's not a motion.
There's
on
no-
it.
This was
Motion be
under
good to-
consideration of amendments to the agenda.
It'd be good to do what you recommend.
Somebody just needs to say I added to the agenda and we vote and get a 2/3 vote.
Okay,
and
Ms.
then we
Savannah,
vote
if
on
you would make that motion, ma'am.
And I'll second it.
it. Add it to the agenda. We add it to the agenda. And then we need at least.
Second, Madam Chair.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we add this resolution to our agenda. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposition has the same opportunity. Motion carried. The chair will entertain a motion for the MPO boundary adjustment expansion.
So moved, Madam Chair.
Second, Madam Chair.
For the second, we will have a roll call vote on this resolution. Ms. Mueller?
Thank you, Madam. Town of Ashland. Yes.
Aye.
Chesterfield County.
Aye.
Aye.
County, Mr. Lumpkins.
Aye.
Ms. La Follette.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Davis.
Aye.
He's there.
Mr. Peterson, can you hear me?
Yes, aye.
Yes. Henrico County, Ms. O'Bannon.
Aye.
New Kent County, Chair Page.
Aye.
Powhatan County.
Aye.
Ms. Carmack.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Mr. Addison.
Aye.
Dr. Newbell.
Aye.
RRTC, Ms. Tim.
Aye.
MTA, Ms. Dean.
Aye.
Mr. Mann.
Aye.
Thank you. That completes the roll call, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to item B, which is new business. Number 1 is RSTBG, budget change and allocation correction.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nicole, if you could pull up the presentation, please. Share it on them. Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. This item is a series of corrections to the RSTP allocations that were adopted back in April. Next slide, please. So the first reason that we need to make adjustments is due to a change in the budget. The allocations plans that we adopt are derived or built on a draft budget that comes out in February each year. And this year, because of the COVID situation, the evolving financial picture, the budget has changed. So this table that you can see on the screen shows the changes. It's mostly been positive. for the TPO. So in all the out years, FY23 to FY27, funding has actually been increased by about $1.5 million each year. In FY22, which is the current year, funding was further reduced by $91,000. Because we built our allocations plan on the original figures, we're over allocated for FY22. So we need to adjust our allocations to get rid of that over allocation. So next slide, please. So that's the first piece of this. The second part is a series of corrections that are needed for one project in particular. So this is UPC 13551. This is a Hanover County project. It's the widening of 360. It's also a smart scale project. So that's RSTP and smart scale funding. When we develop the allocations plans, essentially what we do is we work with VDOT to pull all the current data in terms of estimates, outside funding that's not allocated by the TPO, and the schedule. In that process, there was a transcription error. So there was funding from smart scale that was included under both the previous funding and the planned FY22 to 27 funding. Because those funds were double counted, it looked like there was a surplus of $500,000. So it's $524,000. The TPO reduced the RSTP. Given the tight budget this year, we reduced TPO's commitment to the project by that same amount, which led to a deficit in the overall budget for the project of the $524,000. Next slide, please. There's a second issue on this project as well. Since this is a smart scale project, there are essentially two budgets or two estimates that are available. There's a current estimate, which is basically the day-to-day tracking where the project's at and what the current thinking is. And there's the smart scale estimate, which is the approved estimate that goes through that smart scale vetted process. We have traditionally funded all the smart scale projects to that smart scale level because this is part of the commitment and the match that goes into getting the smart scale dollars. With this round of allocations, the budget or the estimate that was put in was the lower estimate, which is the current day-to-day estimate, which resulted in a second deficit on this project, $231,000 relative to that smart scale estimate. So in total, there's the $524,000 and the $231,000. So it's about $750,000 they're short on this project. So we have worked with VDOT staff and with the TAC to come up with a solution for all three of these issues. And they can all be included as part of the final 6-year plan if the board chooses to act on them. We do need to address the FY22 over allocation regardless. So the over allocation in FY22, the proposed solution is to take, next slide, Nicole. Thank you. So the proposed solution would be to essentially push back the $91,000 from FY22 to FY23 on a project that has funding in both years. Fortunately, the same project that has the deficits also works for this solution. So it's all changing on one project. So that UPC 13551, what we would do is reduce the allocation FY22 and then add the $91,000 FY23 using the balance entry funds. Next slide, please. The solution for the deficits also makes use of our balance entry. This is why it's there. So we would reallocate FY23 funding to address the $524,000 deficit, which was due to the transcription error. And then we would reallocate FY24 funds from the balance entry to the project to address the difference between the smart scale and current estimate. This would restore the funding on the project. It would be back to fully funded, and it would also restore the TPO's commitment to the level that it was at previously. And then the last piece of this is that any of the additional surplus funding, that extra FY23 to FY27 funding that you saw would go into the balance entry. As part of the plan that we developed this year, we borrowed very heavily from the target balance entries that we like to keep in place, which essentially reduces the amount of money that's available for future years. So if the budget holds from year to year, the more that we have in the balance entry, the more we're able to use for selecting the next round of new projects. If we reduce our balance entry, we don't have funding for new projects in those out years. So this is basically helps us to handle any issues like this that could come up, any cost increases, schedule changes, but it would also give us the flexibility to select additional projects for this next round of RSTP. So the table that you see on the screen, it's a little hard on the smaller screen, but it essentially shows the new available budget, what the balance would be for each of those fiscal years and what percentage that is. In general, we start at 0 in year 1 and it works up to about 40% in most years by the end of the program. As you can see, we're only getting up to about 25% in most of those out years. So we really are still at a reduced level, but this will help us out moving forward. So as I mentioned, this was reviewed by TAC at their last meeting and they unanimously recommended approval of these solutions. So the action requested, next slide, please, is 3 parts, and it's basically the 3 steps that I mentioned. So it would be reallocating FY23 and FY24 funding from the balance entry to the project to address deficit. It would be decreasing the FY22 funding to reduce the over allocation, and then using the balance entry to fund in FY23, and then allocating all the remaining RSTP funding to the balance entry. So that's the proposed solution today. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
You got that, Mr. Lawrence?
Madam Chair, Canova Peterson, I move for approval.
Okay, Madam Chair.
Second. Sean Davis, Hanover.
One question. You said that there was the actual estimate and the smart scale estimate.
Yes, ma'am. So there's the smart scale estimate is the approved cost for that project. That's what everything's built around. The pool estimate is sort of the day-to-day. So as new numbers come in, as the project changes through the schedule, that's constantly fluctuating. For most projects, that's what we're using when we're looking at the funding each year. But for smart scale, we always fund that smart scale estimate because that's what all of the matching and the I guess the leveraging and everything is built around that estimate. So
Smart scale.
exactly.
So if you're planning a project, should you aim high on your estimate? I mean, I'm just asking.
So I mean, there is a benefit to aiming higher in that you have the additional leeway and flexibility on the project, and that's usually built in. I'm sure all your local staff will tell you they build in all of the those flexibility in case the cost goes up. So they have all that built in as part of the cost estimate. But smart scale is the estimate that we use whenever there's a smart scale project.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
Just a question.
we have a motion and a second on the floor. Yes, ma'am.
Another question. It looks like 2 errors were made here, and I don't want to berate it, but just a simple yes or no. Do we have something in place to prevent these from happening again?
Yes, ma'am. So we've worked with VDOT to make sure that we are double checking those. So this was, again, just a transcription. The other piece of it though, and we'll get to this in the presentation, with the proposed guidelines is we're also looking at implementing additional TPO side tracking of projects so that we also have a better sense of what the day-to-day project estimate is and if funding is available.
Thank you.
If all hearts and minds are clear, we will have a roll call vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Holland.
Aye.
County, Mr. Lumpkins.
Aye.
Ms. Wascolette.
Aye.
Delaware County, Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Pearson.
Aye.
Echo County, Mr.
Aye.
New Kent County, Chair Page.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Williams.
Aye.
Ms. Carmack.
Aye.
The Richmond, Mr. Addison.
Aye.
Newville.
Aye.
Ms. Tim,
Hello?
can you hear?
Hi, this is Cynthia Newbill. I voted in favor. I'm having technical problems here. Sorry.
Ms. Tim, RMTA, Ms. Dean.
Aye.
And VDOT, Ms. Circling back to GRTC, Ms. Tim.
Aye. Just so you know, sometimes when the folks who are speaking virtually, there's a delay and we get silence from y'all for just a few seconds between when we turn our mutes on or off. But aye, thank you.
That concludes the roll call, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Motion carried. We will move to B2, which is FY22 Unified Work Planning Work Program. Mr. Paulson.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. The next item on the agenda, and we're putting on the screen, is the approval of the fiscal year 22 Unified Planning Work Program. This is the basically the guide for staff that outlines all of the work tasks that are established for the period of July 1 of 2021 through June 30th of 2022. We are following the same model that I introduced last year in terms of a streamlined work program document that outlines by work task what the expected budget is and the emphasis areas, as well as responsibilities. So we split out for each work task what the TPO is responsible for, and then what the expectation is for our partners at BDOT and DRPT to assist. Just a quick highlight for fiscal year 22, our emphasis areas are, first of all, completion of the update to the long range plan. Connect RVA 2045 is expected to be completed in October, and we are full steam ahead for the time between now and then to make sure that that plan is complete and usher through the review and approval process. We also have in August, between now and August, we're gearing up for federal recertification with Federal Highways and BDOT, and we are working with them to make sure that all of our books are in order and our house is clean, so that we can make sure that there are no questions as recertification approaches. There will be meetings in August that all of you are invited to attend to help determine the recertification opinions, and we'll be certainly sending information out about that and asking for your assistance with that. The other things that we are focusing on for this coming year are increasing our opportunities for the public to engage and learn about the work that we do. I've discussed this on multiple occasions. COVID got in the way of going out and actually meeting with a lot of community groups, but that's the plan for this coming year, is to ramp that back up and really focus on being the public about planning for the future. Of what we do is year to year and what's going to happen when the current development proposals are in place, and we don't think as much in our everyday work about what's going to happen 20 years from now. So that's what we do, and that's what we want to bring the public on board and have everyone learn more about the process. The other focus area is to be a resource for the CBTA. That's something that we've really tried hard to do well in the past year, and we'll continue to do that now that the authority is, for the most part, established and processes are in place. There's a few more things to iron out in that regard, but we're looking forward to the full first post-inception year proceedings of the authority and doing some good work to establish priorities and move forward with realizing the impacts of all these additional revenues. So I think that's a quick summary of what the work program is going to entail, and we're asking today for your approval to adopt that work program and move it forward.
Okay, you've heard the recommendation of it. Is there any questions or discussions?
Motion for approval, Madam Chair.
We have a motion and a second to approve the FY22 Unified Planning Work Program. Ms. Mueller, will you hold the members, please?
Yes, ma'am. Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Holland.
Aye.
Cushman County, Mr. Lunkins.
Aye.
Ms. Laskala.
Aye.
Hanover County, Mr. Davis.
Aye.
Mr. Peterson.
Aye.
Henrico County, Ms. O'Bannon.
Aye.
New Kent County, Ms. Page.
Aye.
Powhatan Williams.
Aye.
Ms. Carmack.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Mr. Addison.
Aye.
Is the audio out?
I'm not getting any audio here either.
Gordon, Mr. Davis.
I guess you.
Yeah. Can everyone hear us now?
Okay.
Audio is back. Yes.
Dr. Newell.
I'll start with City of Richmond. We missed Miss Jordan.
Yes.
I don't even see her right now.
Okay. Aye.
RTC, Miss Tim.
Aye. Did you hear my aye?
Miss Dean.
Aye.
Thank you.
Good job.
Those of you that are meeting with us virtually, we do apologize. However, more and more we see the necessity to be here in person. And so we thank you for your patience and tolerance as we get through this meeting. With that being said, B3, which is a title plan update, Mr. Parsons.
Thank you. I did want to note the multiple items in the chat, and Ms. Tim makes a good suggestion. Anybody who's virtual, please mute unless you're speaking. That may help with the audio. And again, we apologize for that. We'll try and get that sorted out. The next item on the agenda is the Title VI plan. And this is the limited English proficiency plan for the TPO. The requested action and the resolution are on your screen, but just a little background on this. The TPO had coordinated with VDOT. VDOT performed a certification review of our existing Title VI plan at the beginning of this year. So early 2021, VDOT did the certification review and determined that the plan needed to be updated and gave us a due date of June 11th. Since that determination letter was delivered, Plan RVA engaged the assistance of one of our bench consultants in developing and updated, fast tracking the development of this entirely updated Title VI plan. So it is, I am extremely pleased with the product that is in your packet today. And we discussed with the executive committee, this is essentially an entire overhaul of the Title VI plan that makes it more accessible to the general public, reduces a lot of the insistence on boilerplate federal language, just to meet the check mark for having a Title VI plan. And this is really an intentional effort to make it more useful, not just for staff, but for the general public and anyone who is is interested and curious about our ways to approach Title VI impacts in our region. The plan, again, we have a due date to get it back to VDOT on June 11th. And the recommendation before you today is to adopt the plan. It does come to you with a full recommendation from the TAC as well as staff concurrence. And be happy to take any particular questions on the plan itself, but that's the recommendation before you today, Madam Chair.
You all have heard the recommendations. Do we have any questions, comments, suggestions, revisions?
Madam Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
The item in our agenda packet on page 63 indicates that Plan RVA engaged a consultant team to put this together. Do we have a sense of what this cost us? Just curious.
We certainly do. I can't say that I do right now, but I can get that for you. This is part of the.
Just curious.
Sure, this is part of the bench consultant that's focused on our public engagement in general. That was established by on the Plan RVA board side.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you very much.
Any other comments?
I'll go ahead and make a comment.
You can make a comment or motion, ma'am.
No, I just want to make
Okay.
a comment. I did mention at the executive committee meeting about this is in English and Spanish, and we have speakers of languages other than English and Spanish in our area. And I don't know if there's a list in here, I know, and in Rica we have, I'll just say quite a few that speak Portuguese. They're from areas like around Brazil and stuff like that, and countries that are around that area. And is there any indication, because I do see it's a lot of it's in Spanish and English, which is excellent. And I'm sure that's better, but there's a form in there, and the idea is to be as easy to get information. I know you can call, you can write a letter, or whatever. There's in person, I guess, or what was the third one? But is there an easy way to take the form online and fill it out in a language other than English? Because I believe it's only in English, but I didn't see Spanish, but maybe there.
Sure, I think Mr. Bushing maybe will provide more information, but part of the plan is we developed this primarily to be focused on English and Spanish because Spanish is the predominant alternative language in the region. But there are additional ones, as you mentioned, like Portuguese and others. And we would hope that we can at least provide alternatives for the complaint form that can be accessed online in additional languages. Those aren't there yet. We do have the digital complaint form that can be submitted online, but we can certainly work to provide other options.
Thank you. Yes.
Any other comments? If not, the chair will entertain a motion.
Move the resolution.
Second.
It's been moved to second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposition is the same opportunity. Hearing none, motion passed. Now we will move on to item B4, which is FY22 Regional Public Transportation Plan. Story for the RRTPO.
In person.
Good morning.
Would you like the summary document?
Yes, that would be great.
Can you share the summary, the first one?
Okay, there was two items that were part of the agenda. One is an overview that was submitted to our board back in May for proposal for the draft FY22 Regional Public Transportation Plan. And then the full draft was also as an attachment to the agenda. I'm going to go over the draft overview with you guys that went to our board. So it did go to our board in May, and then it went to the full CBTA also at the end of May. And what this is the GRTC's FY22 Regional Public Transportation Plan, which is a requirement from the CBTA legislation in order to receive the 15% dedicated funding. The requirement also is to coordinate with the CPF as we develop the plan. So we kicked this off in January. we worked with the Public Transportation Working Group, which is through TAC, and several jurisdictions. And this was through the support of two consultants, Michael Baker International and Jarrett Walker and Associates. We also did an enhanced level of kind of outreach with the jurisdictions by going in person to some of them to talk about the plan. And so what I'm going over here with you is what our FY22 priorities are. So the GRTC budget projection for expenses is $63.2 million, and our capital plan expenses is $30.2 million. The operational capital expenses will be funded through revenues from federal, state, regional, and local, as well as self-generated sources. We are continuing to refine our budget now, and I'm hoping to decrease some of those expenses. It will go before it goes for adoption. But the priorities in the plan, there are 4 of them. We are planning on ensuring the stability and maintenance of transit operations at the levels operated in FY21. So just maintaining our current service levels is priority number 1. Prioritize capital requirements, meaning assets in a state of good repair. So this means just capital match. We require local matches for a lot of our funds from the states and the feds. And this will be using CPA dollars for some of those local matches. Advanced planning studies for operational and capital mobility priorities and needs in the RVA region. So further studying in FY22 to look at other modes of transportation, not just our traditional fixed route, to be working with the jurisdictions to look at microtransit and other options of that sort. And then the third is just preparing for expansion and innovation initiatives in FY23. We did identify through the process several expansion priorities. So we'll be looking at those again with the region to prioritize those, as well as those microtransit studies to come up with a longer, more intense process in FY22 to develop the 23 regional public transportation plan. So tying that all to dollars, that first one, the number 1, allocate $20.1 million is the requirement to be able to operate our current level of service. The capital match is about $700,000 need. To fund the study, we're allocating $200,000 towards that microtransit study. And then just to do the FY23 plan is $200,000. So altogether, the estimated need from CBTA is about $21.2 million. But what our proposal here is to use actually our FY21 dollars, which are currently projected to be somewhere between $18 and $20 million. We did use $200,000 already from the FY21 to pay for the current plan, the FY22 plan. So the net that ends up being 20.3, which is projection for FY21, it's about 20.1 million of CBTA dollars of FY21. And I mentioned that the need is 21.2, so there is a balance that we would need to pay for, and we are recommending to use our federal relief dollars for that difference in FY21. And the benefit of using the dollars from the year before is just making sure our maintenance service stays, knowing that those dollars are already realized from the year before, and making sure we have the dollars needed to fund those studies. So we plan on continuing that practice over the next couple of years and may change that as we move forward. But that is our proposal for FY22, and hope to just expand on that in the next year. And in the FY22 dollars, we are recommending to put in a reserve fund that is restricted until we complete the plan for FY20.
Okay. Do we have any questions or comments? One thing I will say is that in your packet, that the summary document and the draft plan does have a link. So if you want to, I'm a hard copy type of girl, so if you need a hard copy, that's where you can find it. Someone else, was it you, Mr. Williams?
Yes, I was just going to confirm what I thought I heard was you're not planning on anything new in FY22.
Yes.
Your goal is to maintain the same level of service that you're providing now in FY21.
Yes,
correct?
yes.
And that you do have a shortfall, but you're going to be using the federal monies for COVID to meet that shortfall.
Correct.
And that's going to be over the how many years?
Well, just right now, we're just planning for FY '22.
Just
See what that is in the next year.
that amount of money is again.
Roughly between $1 and $2 million, so projecting right now.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
I think also, and I may have missed it, so I apologize if I did, but I also think that the estimated numbers for the funds coming in from CBK is about 28 million.
For, yeah, next year.
And based on what's coming in now, what type of balance will be left over that won't be used, that'll go under a fund towards next year?
Yeah, so we would, the same practice of just maintaining service. So looking again, if we're using the current projections and any sort of growth, probably somewhere around $21 to $22 million. So there would be a net balance of about $6 to $7 million. And we would look at using those dollars for whatever the enhancements we prioritize in that next year. So yes.
Thank you.
Okay. There are no other questions. This is an informational item. And so I would ask, just as before, that you would, one second, man, that you would look through both of these set of documents, any comments, any questions that you reach out. Surely I have a couple, but that you would reach out and try to get your answers satisfied before this becomes an action item. Ms. Abad.
I just have one. How much does a new bus cost?
A new bus is about 500,000.
500,000. Okay.
This is Julie Tim from GRTC, and that is correct that currently our standard buses are about $500,000. I think that once we start to load them up with some of the other technologies, you tend to get closer to 550 or 600. Some of our smaller buses might be a little bit less. So it's when we're looking at articulated buses, I think we talked about that at our last meeting. Those are closer to maybe $750,000. So there's a range depending on the buses that we buy, but they are in that range.
Thank you.
And there was the 60 passenger maybe bus they were talking about at one of our meetings.
60-foot articulated buses.
Yeah, okay.
That's the double, right?
Yeah, they have the connector in the middle.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, ma'am, we thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
All right. Item 5, and this is RSTP. CMAC program got update, and so when giving this presentation, the chair would ask that we be mindful of the question before, and that is what is put in place to avoid the errors that we spoke of earlier today. All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and members of the board. So this is the update to our RSTP CMAC program, and for the first time also includes the TA program. This is just an informational presentation today. This item is still at the TAC, but we wanted to give you a heads up, let you know that this is coming down the pipeline. Obviously, there may be changes at the TAC level. So just a history of the project. This item was included in the FY21 UPWP to update and revise the guidelines. TAC established a subcommittee in the summer of 2020 to guide this process. So that consisted of 5 members, GRTC, and then we had 2 rural and 2 urban or suburban localities. And that subcommittee met from October through this past April before recommending the guidelines to the full TAC for consideration. Next slide. So the primary goals of this update, there were basically 4 main goals that we were trying to achieve. The first was to update our scoring practices so that they align better with the LRTP goals and measures. So as we're working on this new LRTP update, we wanted to make sure we were reflecting the goals and the performance measures that we are adopting as well. The second piece was to add the TA set aside program. So that's the bike ped funding. We wanted to make sure we had something in place to determine how we were allocating that. Through this point, we don't really have any official guidance. It's kind of been staff and TAC driven. So we were looking for something more formalized. The next item was leveraging. So the CVTA and Smart Scale didn't exist when our guidelines were initially adopted. And now that those are in place, we wanted to have a process so that we could leverage our RSTP and CMAC dollars to support those applications better. and basically get more for our money. And then the last piece was improving our tracking. So I'll go into a little bit of detail about each of these. So just going to walk through some of the major changes that we're proposing. So next slide. First is with the applications. We've been using a Google form. We're going to have to update that as part of this process. And it's the biggest change is we're proposing a cap on the number of applications. So in the past, there's been no restriction or limit. What we're proposing is 10 applications for the large localities, above 100,000 people in population, 3 for the smaller localities, and 3 for all the member agencies. So this is similar to the limits on Smart Scale, but this was actually derived completely separately. What we did was we went back through the past 6 rounds of applications to see how many applications were submitted by each of the jurisdictions. And this was the average that came out. So essentially, we were seeing a lot more applications from the larger localities, fewer applications from the smaller localities. So we matched up the limits with what the average was over that 6-year period. Next slide. The next piece is the screening of the projects. So what we're proposing as part of our screening process, what we do right now is we sit down with the project sponsors, so the staff from each locality, and talk through all of their current projects that are underway, kind of get an update, see where they're at. And then we go through their new applications very briefly. What we're proposing is to replace that with more of a formal grant presentation, essentially. So they have 10 minutes to give us a PowerPoint presentation, walk us through the project, so we get a better sense as the TPO scoring team of why this project's needed and why it's important to each jurisdiction. And then the other piece of it is we'll continue screening like we always have, making sure the projects are eligible, that they're consistent with our planning, and that the applications are complete. With the consistency for inclusion, next slide, we'll follow the LRTP, the Connect RVA 2045. These are the inclusion guidelines that have been adopted, but basically it splits projects into local projects or regional projects. Regional projects are the ones that are in the constrained plan that the LRTP contains. And then local projects are smaller projects that don't have any impacts on the capacity of the overall system. So they don't need to be identified specifically in the plan. So if it's a local project, something more minor like an intersection improvement or retiming your signals, putting in a sidewalk, we don't need to have that previously approved through the LRTP. That's eligible. It can go through the application process. The bigger projects, we want to make sure that they're consistent with our long-range planning and that they're specifically listed in the LRTP already. Next slide. So then this brings us to the scoring process. So what we're proposing to do is align the scoring directly with the LRTP. So RSTP and CMAQ, we would follow the performance measures and the goals and weighting that we're including in Connect RVA 2045. And as I mentioned before, we're also proposing scoring for the TA projects as well for the first time. Next slide. So for RSTP, there would be 2 different categories that we would score. One would be studies, and this is because studies aren't the same. I mean, you couldn't evaluate what the safety benefit would be or the congestion benefit. So we needed our own separate scoring for the studies. And studies are sort of the precursor to the actual project taking place. So all the studies would be grouped together and they would have their own scoring. And they would be prioritized for the first year of funding. The goal being you have to have a study in place before you can actually bring a project forward in a lot of cases. Next slide. So for the studies, you probably can't read it on this screen, but basically it's broken down into 2 sections. One is this project necessary, or is this study necessary to advance a project, a recommendation, or a policy from our long-range plan? That's a question we already asked. So that would be worth 40% of the score. And the rest would be essentially, does it advance any of the goals? So there's 5 goals in the new long-range plan. And this splits it up into, I think it's 7 questions. So some of those goals are split, but the weighting mirrors what's in the LRTP, the draft LRTP right now. And it's basically safety, mode choice, accessibility, connections to our activity centers in the region, protecting the natural environment, economic growth, and then congestion management. So it's all the big themes that we always talk about, and those are the goals that we've adopted for the LRTP. This is making sure that those studies are advancing the goals. Next slide. So then the rest of the RSTP program would go through our projects and programs scoring, which is directly connected to the LRTP scoring. So it'd be the same process that we're using right now for the RSTP. We're proposing to use that for all of these projects as well. And I'm sure you've seen the presentations from Sulab over the past few months, but it's essentially, there's 15 performance measures that we would assess for each project, and they would get summed up and scored, and then it would be a benefit over cost, similar to how Smart Scale operates, but our own performance measures. So the benefit of this is that we would have consistency. So from the long range plan through what we're selecting to fund, it's the same process. So if a project scores well and is included in our long range plan, it's going to score well in our selection process for funding. The other benefit is for anything that's regionally significant, all the projects that are included in the long range plan, we've already developed all the data and we have all the tools in place that we can do all of the assessment essentially without a lot of input from the locality. So it'd be a streamlined application for any of those projects. If it's something more minor, like the signal timing, sidewalks, we're going to need more information to go with the application because we don't have that. But for the bigger projects, we have the information, we'll be able to assess it directly. So next slide, please. So this is the scoring, and I'm sure you've seen various versions of this throughout the process with the LRTP, but basically safety is worth 25% of the overall score, and that's based on your crash rates and the total number of crashes. Then we have mobility, which is basically the number of people that are being moved through and how much delay people are experiencing in traffic. Accessibility is focused on access to jobs and access to destinations being other services like schools, hospitals, grocery stores. There's a list that we've defined. And then those same for environmental justice communities. So communities of concern are communities that have been disadvantaged historically. We're making sure that we're including access to jobs and destinations as well specifically. And then for economic development, it's a focus on job growth and truck traffic, and that's more on the freight side, which is something that we're also required to consider as part of the transportation planning. And then finally, there's the environment and land use. So it's impact to wetlands and other sensitive features, reducing air pollution, focusing specifically on the precursors for ozone, reduction in vehicle miles traveled per capita. So essentially making things closer to where people are. And then connection to activity centers, which again, we've talked about the activity centers, but those are the main areas where there's jobs and growth in the area. So that's the proposed scoring. And the last column on the right is the measure for each of those specific performance measures, how many points they would be worth. And then all of this adds up to 100. It's divided over the cost in $10 million. Next slide, please. For CMAQ, we're proposing to follow the same scoring. So CMAQ is focused on air quality, and really the big thing that we look at is reduction of the NOx and the VOC emissions, which are the precursors to ozone. We're already measuring that as part of our Connect RVA scoring and what's proposed for RSTP. So our thought here was to use the same scoring process so we could look at all the other goals that we have as a region as well, but then focus on the emissions. So the project would have to show a reduction in emissions, and then we would also look at the cost effectiveness of those emissions reductions on top of the overall scoring. And again, the benefit here would be that we would be able to do most of this analysis internally without having a lot of input from the localities to try and make the process easier for those regionally significant projects. And then the other piece with CMAQ is continued funding for ride finders off the top. So that's been $500,000 a year off the top, and that's been in place for a long time, as long as these guidelines have been around, I believe. And I think we formalized it at the 500,000 level maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and we just continued that at the current level. Next slide. So then there's the TA set aside projects. So we don't do our own scoring of TA currently. Basically, the way that it works is the applications, we endorse them, they go to VDOT, VDOT assesses the projects and gives us back a merit score. So this is the same score that they use statewide, and it essentially looks at a wide variety of factors. How ready is the project? What's the experience of the sponsor with federal programs? Looks at the benefit of the project to some extent. So it's a very wide-ranging score. And what they do is they give it an assessment, and we get those scores back in January each year. And then we have to bring a recommendation to you. So what we're proposing is to take that and use that as the bulk of the scoring for the projects, 80%, but also looking at some other regionally specific items. So one would be, is it included in our regional bike ped plan? So we have a plan for regional bike ped network. So we want to make sure that we're investing those dollars that we're allocating at the regional level, that they're going towards the projects we've already identified as priorities. The other piece of it is equity and access. So this goes back to what we were talking about with the RSTP scoring, but it's essentially the communities, the EJ communities that are being served, the environmental justice communities. So we would want to see, is the project located in an area that could benefit those communities as well? And that's proposed at 10% of the overall score. And then same thing, benefit cost analysis to see how much we're getting for our money. Which brings us to the actual allocations and project selection side. So the projects would be prioritized based on that cost benefit score at the end. And then we would follow what we've always done. Allocations would go first to the existing projects that need funding for their next phase. And then it would go, whatever's left over would be available for new projects. And we would follow the ranking and work our way down the list. If it's able to be funded, we would fund that project. If not, we'd move on to the next one. So it's basically matching up funding and using some sort of prioritization. And then the other piece of this is we've defined those target balances. So we were talking a little bit about the balance entry earlier and how that serves against cost increases or transcription errors. But the goal here would be to have that defined, because right now it's kind of an informal process. We ramp it up over time, but we haven't really defined what those numbers are. So this proposes to actually put something in place. So we would make sure we've used up any previous money. We would actually, for the first time, propose leaving some money in the balance for year one. So this was something that actually came as a recommendation from VDOT, and it's to help us cover projects that go to construction in that year one. It might have a cost increase when it comes down to the bid. We need to be able to fund that. And it's been pretty difficult to fund those otherwise because we have to hunt for money, transfer and move around. But this would give us a little surplus to use there. And then basically it ramps up. So we keep about 40% in reserve by the time we get out to year 6. Next slide. So then this brings us to leveraging, which I mentioned was one of the key goals of this process. So leveraging, the goal here is to maximize the benefit of our limited dollars. So what we're proposing is that the TPO would fund the PE phase, the first phase of most projects that they come in for leveraging. So what we would assess it on when we do that cost benefit analysis is only the cost of that first phase. And we would allocate the funding in one of the out years, year 5, year 6, to give the sponsor time to go find other money, whether it's CBTA, smart scale, revenue share, whatever it is. But then they would be able to go out there and look for that funding. If they're not able to get it by the time we get up close to that year, they can request one extension. And if they don't request an extension or they've already had their extension, then they either can withdraw the project or compete with the full cost of the project. So it's basically giving localities a chance to use the money to try and get other money first. And then if that doesn't work, then they have to compete with all the other new projects for full funding.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, would you like to have questions now, or would you like to wait till the end?
I'm happy to entertain them now. If that works.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, sir.
When you get into this thing about leveraging, and you're saying you've given the localities X number of years to be able to assemble pots of money from different locations or sources, what is the percentage or amount of money that the locality has to come in with to draw down the money from the RSTP or CMAQ?
Sure. So if in this case for what's proposed here with leveraging, it would be that the project would need to be fully funded. Because we're funding the first phase of the project, they would need to have the full funding in place to be able to get started at that point. The other side of it.
I'm still confused when you say the first phase.
Sure. So most projects go through preliminary engineering and then right away, then construction. So if we're funding just the engineering side, then they would need to have the
That's
funding.
the cheapest part of the project.
Correct. So it is the cheapest part of the project, which is the benefit to our side of giving some of the money towards buying down the cost. But this isn't the only option. Obviously, you can still come in and ask for full funding for a project. So this leveraging is just another option and a defined process that we're putting into place.
Okay, but before you're going to give me the money for the preliminary engineering, I've got to come up with the rest of the money. What if you give me the money for the preliminary engineering and then I don't have the money for the rest of the project X number of years down the road?
Sure. So what we're proposing is you would be able to request one extension. So to push it back another, 3 years, 4 years to give yourself extra time. If that doesn't work or you decide not to go that route, you can either withdraw it and then we would remove the project and move that money somewhere else where it could be used. Or you could ask for full funding and say, you know what, I was only able to get partial funding. I want to compete for the rest of the funding to fill it up. And then it would have to get scored against all the other projects based on that cost.
But at that point, I would have spent money for the preliminary engineering that you gave me. Is that correct?
No, it wouldn't have been spent yet. So we're putting it way out into the future. So the money's not spent yet. It's basically you're having time to assemble the funding to actually start the project.
Can I maybe restate it, maybe provide some clarity? So right now, and Miles, tell me if I'm saying this wrong. Right now, the process is everybody competes for full funding. What this does is adds in an additional measure to say the TPO is committing the PE amount so that then Powhatan can go out and say, well, I've got 10% of the cost of the project committed from the TPO as a match. Can I leverage that to get additional smart scale funds to make the whole thing work?
So we're
If that
leveraging
doesn't
against
work-
each other? Is that what you're saying? You basically you're saying, okay, if I go with smart scale, I got this from the TPO. Okay, and then from the TPO, I'm saying maybe I can get something from the smart scale.
Correct. If that doesn't work, then you come back and say, I'm going to go for full funding.
Or you could remove the money from another project. Could you do that? Say you have another project that you could move some of that money into that project, move it from project to project.
Well, I think the whole idea here is to be able to, we've had conversations for the last 2 years about we can't compete with Hampton Roads in Northern Virginia. What this does is gives local governments in our region the ability to say, I have a commitment for match funding. So when I go and fill out my smart scale application, you can put that you have match funding. And the amount here is just to use the guideline of whatever the preliminary engineering would cost as that match. It doesn't, I mean, this is up for discussion still at the TAC level, but this is kind of what's being discussed. To be
When we
able to
said we
say,
couldn't compete as a region, what we were talking about, I thought was smart scale.
Yeah.
Okay,
that's a big part of it, yes.
okay, this is part of it, but now, the RSTP is, through the NPO.
So I guess the best way to think of it is the MPO can still continue to fully fund your project. That's part of this process as well. But if you want to compete for smart scale and you have a project already identified that you're going to go to smart scale for, you can ask for us to fund part of it, which brings down your overall cost benefit score, which will make you score better in smart scale. So the idea here is that we could be using this money not just to fully fund projects on our own, but also to bring more smart scale dollars into the region potentially.
Okay, that wasn't clear,
Yeah, that's actually very good. That's the best thing you've said
I
today.
think you see light bulbs going on on this side of the
That's
table. We didn't have a clue.
That
what
side
you
of the
were
room
doing.
got really, really bright.
Yeah.
No, we didn't understand
Absolutely.
what your end goals were, okay?
That
We
makes sense.
were over here just stuck on RSTP and CMAC, okay? And figuring out, as, John had mentioned, in an executive session, how we were going to be able to compete with the limited dollars that we were going to have to leverage. So what you're saying now is I can potentially get money or have money that's representative from the, let's just say RSTP funds, and then I can show that as a leverage going against smart scale projects. Is that what I'm?
Yes.
I see heads going up and down, so that's.
So we've never had this process defined. So the goal was to try and get this into the document so we have a way that we can start using the MPO's money to help us with more successful smart scale applications region-wide.
Okay, I'll yield to my colleagues from Brisbane if they have any questions at this point.
Well, yeah, I like what you're saying here. See how this works out, though.
What other sources are available for funding? Federal level?
terms of leveraging. So the primary one is going to be smart scale, but it could also be CVTA applications. Since that process hasn't been defined yet for the regional CVTA, if you're buying down your cost, then you're going to be asking less from CVTA as well. So it'd help with success on those. There's other also as well, like projects can be put together with various funding sources. So revenue share, for example, is capped at 5 million, I believe, each year. So if you can only get that much from the revenue share side, you can also use RSTP to start filling in some of those gaps and leveraging that for those applications as well. So it's there. Pretty much anything that you're submitting an application for, you could potentially buy down some of your costs using this approach.
Mr. Carl, is it you? After Mr. Carl, I would like, because we do have some of our members viewing virtually, if you have any questions or comments as well, we would entertain your comments. So after Mr. Carl. Mr. Carl?
Thank you. Madam Chair, I guess the other thing, we'll talk about the CVTA for a minute. Part of what I think this will also do is actually have this organization to be a little bit more competitive with the CVTA, truthfully, because in talking about trying to come to the CVTA to leverage towards money for the CVTA, I think that depending on what the CVTA decides to do in the future, whether we do some pay-as-you-go or in bonding, this actually will also, I guess, be competitive against what the CVTA is trying to leverage their funds for as well. And so just keep that in mind if you're, that it may not necessarily give you an opportunity to get funds from the CVTA, but it may also make your projects locally competitive against projects that you're not necessarily submitted to the CVTA for matching dollars, if that makes sense. So it's just something to keep in mind, because there may be an opportunity to get money through the CVTA depending on how that structurally moves forward and whether or not they issue debt, or if they even have pay-as-you-go funds available. But then again, it may not. And that's just something that hasn't been determined yet.
Do we have any online questions? Anybody in the chat?
Ms.
All
Chair,
right, absolutely. Ms. Tam?
thank you. I have a couple of questions. How is the leveraging process that you're proposing different from the amount of money that's being allocated for the RSTP, the studies? The reason why I asked that, to give a little context, is that at HRT, they use the STP process to provide some studies to be able to get enough information available so that good applications could be made at the federal and state to do that leveraging. So how is this different from using the study process, where those studies can sometimes go all the way through preliminary engineering, which can be 30% design, to final engineering, and be used for those applications? Can you help clarify the difference between the studies and the leveraging and how that works?
As you mentioned, can get you through part of the design most of the time. And it's a lot of the background that's needed for an application. So especially in the Smart Scale program, you essentially need the study already done before you can even apply for the funding. So it's sort of a first step. And that's why we mentioned that it would be focus of early funding, year one funding, to get those studies in place. What this leveraging does is it goes beyond that. So you have the study in place, which you could have requested through RSTP. And this leveraging would then give you the full funding for the PE phase of the project as well. So it's a cost commitment to buy down the overall Smart Scale. So you could potentially get both pieces from the TPO if you submitted 2 separate applications for the project over time. So it would improve the overall cost benefit score. Plus we would give you all the background data and studies that you would need.
If I can follow up on that, and I love this, I think this is amazing. I had some comments with some of the feds about the RAISE infrastructure program that Biden is putting out, that a lot of the smaller jurisdictions and the smaller transit agencies are less able to leverage that money because we don't have shovel ready, because we haven't been able to invest in the studies or the engineering. So having this available certainly might not help us with RAISE, but having us be more shovel ready is great. The only concern I would ask us to question is that it sounded like that leveraging is so far in the future that it could kind of get pulled away, as opposed to being an additive benefit if before we get the commitment for the RAISE funding or the Smart Scale funding or the CVTA funding, that we really need the information that comes out of preliminary engineering to have that good application. but we need the money that's coming out of it. There's a little bit of a catch-22, it sounds like.
So the studies, any of the study side, that funding you could get and complete a study right away. That piece is not tied up with this leveraging. So that funding would still be essentially immediate. We could do that as early as year one. So you could have it, study starting by the next year. The difference here with the leveraging is essentially most of these projects, you can't get started until you have full funding in place. So what this is doing is allowing us to buy part of it and then you to get the other funding. And so it has to be somewhere in the future, because if we put it right in year 2 or something like that, you wouldn't have enough time to go find those other sources. So that's the thought. I'm pushing it out towards the later out years of the plan. And then it is a bit of a catch-22 because you can't do engineering without it. But unfortunately, with all the federal funding, that's kind of the restrictions that we're working with, is that you have to get the phase authorized. It has to be fully funded before we can have the project in there and give it a UPC. So we're working within the restrictions that we have.
Can I get an indulgence for one more question? And because I think this is great, but the question that I have is, age has slipped my mind. I'll have to come back to it. Senior moment.
Okay.
Been there.
There.
Madam Chairman, I'd just like to make, this is not necessarily a question, it's more of a statement. But it seems like everything now is geared to leveraging. That's the takeaway from this discussion. Everything now is about leveraging and going back to what Chad said before about being able to compete, whether it's here at the TPO or whether it's for smart scale projects, competing with other regions, et cetera. So a small jurisdiction, I'm starting off with a small bag of money, going from CVTA. And we're looking in Powhatan, maybe getting $1.3, $1.5 million the first year. So now I'm looking at being able to possibly take those monies and be able to leverage something with an application with RSTP. Then maybe I hope that, in the submission of a smart scale project, that I can get more money, maybe with the leveraging of the RSTP. So it's this building of leveraging over these different programs that might get me to what the lady was just talking about. My end goal, how many years down the road, that's yet to be determined. Because, for example, like smart scale, was it every 2 years? So you have gaps there. You're not able to do all this at one time. But anyway, that's my takeaway. And I appreciate the clarity because I think it helped Goochland as well as understand what's
my question, when y'all have if I can get it.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. It had to do with the qualification to be able to get the money. I think I saw the slide said that in order to be eligible for it, you had to be in the long range transportation plan. Otherwise, you might be ineligible. Is that still the case for studies and for leveraging? Because sometimes you need the studies, the leveraging, to actually have a project defined enough to even submit it for the long range transportation plan. I understand that there's certain projects just yesterday that were recommended coming out because we don't have the necessary studies to advance them. The BRT project's an example. So do we have another catch-22 where we don't have enough information to keep it in the long range transportation plan, but because it's not in the long range transportation plan, we can't get the money to study it?
You had a diagram that showed that you got local projects that could be approved as well. You have constrained and unconstrained for the long range transportation plan, correct?
Correct.
All right.
So studies are all classified essentially as local projects, the way that the breakdown works. So every study is eligible, and then the scoring is basically, is it advancing a policy or recommendation or project that is in the long range? So mobility is a goal and access is a goal, then a transit study would obviously be eligible that way.
Here's another important point. We're talking about the long range transportation plan. We're at the CVTA developing regional priorities today, which may or may not be part of the long range transportation plan.
Madam Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Davis?
I just want to echo those comments in support of that statement, particularly with CVTA. I mean, making some of these plans, what we're doing here, it may not mesh, or CVTA may not mesh with this, and I don't know how you reconcile that. I don't know that we can today, but two separate entities and having those plans, like the gentleman just spoke to, that may not reconcile, leaves us in a very precarious situation. And I just say that to be on the record. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, we get ready to wrap this up. Any other questions or comments?
So the technical.
Okay, so we have some additional information.
Yeah, there's a few more.
So you said that we would get 10 minutes. You said early, I heard this, I wrote it down. And we have 10 minutes to fight for our funding. But you are like 18 minutes and I'll subtract airtime. So, okay, I just want you to know, in 10 minutes. Go ahead, sir.
So the next slide, Nicole.
Do it quick, Nicole, so you can't take.
So these are the last slides. So the last piece is the tracking and reporting. So we did talk about this earlier. But basically what we're proposing is, instead of having one meeting each year to sit down and talk with each of the sponsors, that each quarter they submit an update on the project. Just so we have better information that's more accurate. And it's very high level. Basically, we want to know, is the schedule still the same? Is the estimate still the same? Where are you on the project? And what challenges are coming up that might change the cost of the schedule? So really just getting a sense of where the project's at, and how close we are to getting it implemented. It's not meant to be a lot of time and be a quick, easy online form. And the goal here is just that we have more information throughout the year so that we don't have surprises coming. The other piece of this is we put a page together on the website that you can track projects essentially moving from the LRTP into RSTP CMAQ into the TIP, kind of putting the whole picture together of here's where the vision was, here's where we actually funded it, and then here's it getting implemented. So trying to put the process all into perspective. And then last slide is just a reminder, we're not asking for any action today. This was just an introduction and discussion. So this is at TAC right now. And TAC is probably going to make changes to this as we go through this process. So they've had this same presentation last month, and this month it's coming back to them after they've had the month to review it. So we're hoping to bring it back to you later this summer with whatever TAC recommends, so that we can take action on it and hopefully have it in place for the new RSTP CMAQ applications in October.
Okay, so one other thing, is this RSTP or is this RSTBG?
So it's the same it's the same name. Basically, the old name was the Surface Transportation Program. Now it's the Surface Transportation Block Grant, and the R just stands for regional. So it's the same program. It's just changed names over time.
Okay, because you kept saying both. And it's like,
yeah, so I apologize for that. So technically, it is STBG now.
Okay.
But Madam Chair, I asked the same question to Chet, because, here it is, we have another acronym
Right,
yet.
I know, right? Okay.
Like we didn't have enough.
So I think all our questions and discussions have been gone over. So we thank you. You still have the opportunity to reach Mr. Bushins before this becomes an action item. So I encourage everyone to go back to their respective localities as your questions, and you can move forward. Moving forward is item 6, which is the Highway Infrastructure Program.
Sure. And I promise I'll keep this one on time.
Sure, 11:02, okay.
Just saying.
So this is also just an informational item. So as part of the second COVID relief bill that passed back in December of last year, there was additional funding from the federal government that was appropriated to go to the Highway Infrastructure Program, which is what usually funds all of our programs. But part of this was essentially then getting sub-allocated down to the states and down to the MPOs to be used as additional RSTP funding. So it's essentially additional RSTP funds that we have for FY22. And the TPO share is 7.6 million. So this is a positive. It offsets the decreases that we saw in FY22 funding. So it comes with some restrictions. It can be used for anything that we can use RSTP on. It has some other uses that we can use it for as well, like funding for operational sides and staffing even. So there's a lot more flexibility than normal RSTP. But the biggest catch here is that the funds have to be obligated by 2024, which means we basically need projects that are ready to go right now. So we haven't had a time to come up with a recommendation yet. We're still discussing this with VDOT to figure out the best strategy on how to use these funds in combination with the RSTP funds that we already have. But what we're proposing right now is to come back to you in later this summer, after we've had a chance to work with VDOT and the TAC, with a recommendation on how to allocate these funds. Until that time, they're just going to sit in a reserve in the balance entry until we find a use for them.
So you asked us to correct errors, and you have $7.6 million.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So it is, it's not RSTP. It's useful for anything that we use RSTP. So we could have used it for this, but we felt it was cleaner to just keep the RSTP funding in one place and then go back and use this to address the issues or address whatever projects or anything that we decide to use it on later.
Okay. Any other questions? I know y'all wanted to know that one. All right, thank you so much. All right, now as we move on to B7, which is an exciting part of our agenda, which is the election of our FY22 TPO officers. As we discussed this morning at our executive meeting, that we have 2 nominees, and that is for Chair, Mr. David Williams of Powhatan, and Vice Chair, Ms. Susan. Go ahead. Lasquette of Gooseland. And so can we vote on them in one, or do we have to do it separate?
We had a recommendation. from the executive.
It's here.
We had a recommendation this morning from the executive committee for these 2 nominees. And so at this time, the chair would entertain any other nominations or motions to vote on our future chair and vice chair.
This is on page 160. You can fill in the names. So at the approval of the executive committee, I move the resolution. And you don't really need a second if it comes from the committee, but it would be good to have a second.
Okay. So.
John and I tied on that. We both said second.
Absolutely. So, the action is that the TPO Policy Board is requested to elect FY22 Chair, Vice Chair to serve July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. And so that is my requested action.
Motion made second.
Okay, we ask for a roll call vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, try.
Town of Ashland, Mr. Hodges.
Aye.
Chesterfield County, Mr. Carroll.
Aye.
Mr. Holland.
Aye. Aye.
Colette.
No, aye.
Hanover County, Davis.
Lost sound again. If you can hear me, this is I.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. New Kent County, Ms. King.
Aye.
Powhatan County, Mr. Williams. Ms. Carmack.
Aye.
City of Richmond, Mr. Addison. I'll circle back. Dr. Newbell. You may have left. GRT.
I'm here. I'm sorry. Can you hear me? This is Catherine Jordan, City of Richmond. Aye.
I was an aye.
RMTA, Ms. Dean.
Aye.
Thank you, that.
Aye.
Thank you, that concludes the roll call.
And thank you. So it is resolved that the Richmond Regional Transportation Plan Organization elects for FY 22, Mr. Williams as chair and Mrs. Lassolette as vice chair. And we thank you for your commitment to serve this great organization. Moving on to agency and committee reports, we will have reports from VDOT, followed by DRTP, and we will have a scaled down version. Thank you so much.
Chairman for life.
All of the
I will move as quickly as I can. 2021 CTP meeting, they had workshop presentations on the I-395-95 commuter choice, transportation performance management and safety measures, transit ridership incentive program draft policy, economic development access program, interstate operations and enhancement program, Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, and the Smart Scale Round 4 consensus scenario. At their action meeting, the only action of consequence was they adopted the Smart Scale Round 4 consensus scenario. The next CTP meeting, the workshop is set for June 22nd at 10 a.m. The action meeting is set for June 23rd at 9 a.m. At this point, we believe it'll be virtual. If not, we will let you all know. On the 6-year improvement plan development, this plan is still underway. Development of the plan is still underway. As expected, the CTB took action on the consensus funding for Smart Scale at their June meeting. We anticipate the final approval of the plan at the June meeting as well. No public hearings are scheduled for projects within the TPO study area at this time.
Thank you so much. I'm pretty sure there are no questions or comments. So now we will entertain DRPT report.
Good morning. I will be very brief as well. There are 2 items that are on my agency update that have a time frame that is sensitive. So the first, Shane already mentioned the Transit Ridership Incentive Program. That policy is open for public comment now through June 18th. We anticipate taking that to the board for action on June 23rd. The guidelines for that program are also available for public comment through July 7th. And so that is our new program that is to support regional connectivity and also to reduce barriers to transit use by supporting low-income and zero-fare programs. So that is time sensitive and something I wanted to mention. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you specifically from our report is our statewide rail plan. We do have a public survey that is out right now that's open through June 13th. So we are looking for feedback that will help inform that statewide rail plan. And with that, I will conclude my report. Thank you.
So much, ma'am, for your report as well. Moving on to C2, which is Community Transportation Advisory Committee meeting report.
Yes, ma'am, I'll be very brief as well. It is a pleasure to give an in-person report. That's the first time we've done
Glad
this.
to see you here.
Among the topics that were discussed at the May 20th virtual meeting were COVID-19 and its implications on commuting. We also talked about Richmond International Airport, some of the things that they're doing around ground transportation and parking. And we received an update on Connect RVA 2045. At the May meeting, CTAC elected Upton Martin as our chair, as our vice chair. And the next meeting of CTAC is scheduled for July 15th.
Thank you so much, sir, for your report. Other business and future meeting topics, July 1st will be Connect RVA 2045 update, a Vision Zero work group update, and resiliency. And then in August 5th meeting will be the regional bicycle and pedestrian plan update. We do have future topics which may or may not change, which is the DRPT transit mobilization quality study. That's scheduled tentatively for July 2021, and then agreement between the Commonwealth and Amtrak, CSX and the Virginia River Express launching a $3.7 billion investment to expand and improve passenger, commuter, and freight rail in Virginia and create a vital connection in America's national trail network between northeast and southeast corners and the public engagement community outreach efforts. At this time, we will be asking if there are any comments from any of our members. Mr. Hodges?
Anyone interested in hiking the Fall Line Trail, or at least its current condition, unimproved mostly, please contact me or go on sportsfactors.org. We're looking for the weekend of June 11th to 12th to hike the whole thing.
If I could comment to that, the only concern that I have with that is that, especially through Chesterfield, that many of the locations where this is going to route through have not been purchased yet, so it's still considered private property. And I would make sure that someone, I guess, secures authorization to go on those properties prior to going on there, or use an alternative route close to it. We just haven't had the opportunity to secure right away of the through portion through all of Chesterfield. So, not that I think anybody who owns any of their property would probably lie, but I mean, I think out of respect, it's probably a good idea too. And that's not you, that's sports backers, and we've relayed that same information to them as well, that they need to be mindful of property rights at this time.
Thank you. Any other comments from our members?
Madam Chair. Mr. Mann, I just wanted to note that for everybody watching remotely, even as we transition back to in-person meetings over the next few months, we have no intention of stopping recording the meetings and putting them on our YouTube channel. And part of that is our focus on making the work that we do accessible to everyone. So that will continue to happen, and we hope to have a hybrid option as much as we can for people to participate remotely. So I think more is better, and that's what our focus is, to try and interpret the requirements along with what we'd like to do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Mr. Mann?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just want to mention on the Fall Line Trail that I am the state point of contact for Fall Line Trail. I'll be reaching out to all the localities. I mentioned it at the CDTA meeting, but want to mention it to this group as well. It's a priority of the governor's office and the secretary for us to get the funding in place ASAP for the Fall Line Trails. So you'll be hearing from me, or your staffs will be hearing from me if you're one of the affected localities. And I just want to make sure you all know if you have any concerns or anything, please reach out to me directly, and I'll make sure you get the resources you need from the state. So, thank you.
All right. Anyone attending on Zoom have any comments or questions? Any comments at this time? I'm hearing none. Our next meeting is scheduled for August 2021.
That's my.
It
is July. It's July 1st.
The paper
No,
says.
she said August.
It is July. Well, I mean,
I would say August.
We will be having a July meeting. And I just thank you for your time. I think we had very good discussion today. I think it was a lot of clarity brought through from that. And so I just thank you for exercising your patience with me as we went through our agenda today. And if all hearts and minds are clear, I will entertain if you want to make a motion for adjournment. If not,
Please.
moved in second, all in favor?